Introvert, extrovert, sensor, intuitive, thinker, feeler, judger, perceiver. What your personality type is speaks volumes about what you want, how you'll act, and who you'll get along with. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI, is by far the most popular of the personality tests.
Millions of people have taken the official MBTI test, and it's used by human resources departments in Fortune 500 companies across the globe. But is it reliable science, or just a popular fad that tells people what they want to believe about themselves? That's what we set out to uncover in this episode of
Is That For Real?
Perfect.
Well, there's a little background for you. But is the Myers-Briggs, what is it?
MBTI. Yes, it's for real.
Yeah, it's for you. Think it's for real?
It's
real.
totally for real.
You don't think it's just pigeonholing
If I like
people?
the results that it gives me, it's for real. If I don't like the results, no.
Now, I have to say, before we started going into it, I had taken the test half a dozen times. As from the time I was a teenager. First time I ever had to take it, I was in 7th grade. I remember they gave us the aptitude test. It was Myers-Briggs.
Cool.
And I always got the same result until recently. We both took a detailed MBTI test, like 150 questions.
Something like that.
It was a lot. And really broke it down, 40 pages.
What? Okay, who was this? Type Finder, Truity, or whatever it
Yeah,
was?
Truity.com.
These guys.
Yeah. And we paid for the full thing to get the whole 40-page report. And I got to say, it is pretty damn on target. But my result was not what our resident expert on Myers-Briggs thought, though you were very close. You were very close because he thought that I was an INTJ, which is what I always thought I was.
And I maintained that position. And Matt, if you're watching, I still maintain that position.
But the test came back this time as an ENFJ.
Right.
Only by 8% above INTJ. So INTJ was in the wheelhouse. You were close. Now, what is all these letters we're talking about? Why don't you tell us, Thesis, what do these letters mean? Because you know more about this than I do.
Yeah, so I want to talk about that, but real quick, I want to talk about your ENFJ result real quick. Okay, so if we are going by extroversion as opposed to communication style, which is what Matt does, who is on the ENTP XJW page, cool page. But
got an interview with him coming up on this episode too.
Absolutely, yeah, good one. If we're talking about communication style, yes, we're both extroverts in the sense that we tend to direct the flow of the conversation and we're assertive and we kind of take charge. We can even initiate conversation. But if we're talking about social preference, which is the type of introversion versus extroversion that I usually focus on, then that would make us both introverts still.
And I'm barely over the line for extroversion. It's 45% introvert, 55% extroverts. I'm only 5% over the line. It's not like I'm not a social butterfly at all. I'm not way on the other end.
And that would be classified as ambiversion. Yeah. That's when you're both, basically. Right. But, okay, so getting into the whole...
what do these letters mean?
Yeah, so the letters. E, extrovert. I, introvert. S, sensing or sensor. Intuitive, which... I guess so they wouldn't have two I's. They use the second letter, just N, intuitive. Thinker versus feeler, judger versus perceiver.
And you have one of each of those four categories. You're
Basically.
You're either, of course, it's not like you're either or. Most people fall somewhere in the middle, and that's where the people who don't agree.
That's where the skeptics.
That's where the skeptics come in.
Yep.
Because
they're generalizations.
Yeah, they are generalizations. But that's what they mean. You've got one of each of those, and you have a certain range. And that's why I liked the Truity test, because it didn't just say, oh, well, you're, in your case, INFP. It didn't say that. It really broke it down. You're this percentage of these things. Like, these are the percentages for each of these attributes involved in that particular letter. You have these percentages. And I like that. And it describes what each of them means under what circumstances. So it's 40 pages. It's a long-ass report. But I definitely think that it nailed it better. And you didn't like some of what it said.
Oh, well, some of it is subject for debate, okay?
Yeah.
It is interesting, though, because a lot of people write it off as complete BS. But I tend to disagree, because a lot of times if you study Myers-Briggs, which is basically, how do I explain this? The simplified version of Carl Jung's functions.
Yeah.
It's based off of Carl Jung's functions.
Mostly.
Yeah.
The last one, the
Perceiver Judger?
Yeah, that one was not based off of his functions.
Right. And that was added later on. But it's really interesting because, even though a lot of people write it off and it is highly debatable, I know for me personally, I can walk into a room or I can talk to somebody and very quickly I can tell, okay, ISTJ, ISTP, INFP over there in the corner painting, ENFP, ESTJ. You can tell. And in being able to know these things, it's really interesting because it can tell you a lot about this person, and it can tell you a lot about the people that you're around, even a lot of the details that they don't want to tell you. And you can kind of know people's secrets with it, really.
And to be fair about that, when we first started hanging out, you tagged me as an INTJ,
I did.
Which is what I've gotten every other time I've taken the test without me ever telling you.
Yeah.
So there must be some factual basis to it, or you couldn't have done that.
Exactly. And that's how I feel. There'd be no way for me to generalize it if it was that, hit and miss.
Right.
Now, Matt, who we did the interview with, he typed you as an ISTJ.
Yeah.
And even that wasn't completely off. It wasn't like Matt said he was an ESFP, something that would be way off.
And he did that just from watching my videos.
Yeah.
Which I have to say, that's pretty impressive to get that close just from watching the videos. And when you dig into my actual results, I'm very much in the middle when it comes to the sensor versus intuitive.
Yeah.
So it'd be easy to pick one side or the other.
Yeah, and for people watching, sensor versus intuitive, okay, so sensory deals with a lot of concrete information, a lot of proven facts, tried, tested, and true data, procedures, and traditions, whereas the intuitive is the more contemplative, abstract, philosophical, or new and innovative way of doing things. It tends to ponder or be willing to entertain things that are not concrete, like the what ifs. And that's why, even though Matt classes you as an ISTJ, which I don't fully disagree with, I feel like you'd be both, which would be an IXTJ, which means that you can use both functions interchangeably because you're very good at thinking about the abstract and you have a love for philosophy.
Yeah, that's true, which is very much the intuitive side.
That's a very intuitive thing because it's not a concrete science. It's more of an abstract what if or could be versus a what is.
But I'm also a software developer.
Yeah.
Which is very concrete, very much about the numbers and the data and the facts. And that's very much on the sensor side.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty squarely in the center of that one, so I'll grant them that. Now, since we're on that topic, most people get what an introvert versus an extrovert is.
Yeah.
Though I will say this, it's not necessarily about how outgoing you are. It's about whether or not you draw energy from that or that takes energy from you. Like someone who's an extrovert when they're around a lot of people, a lot of activity, they're energized by it.
Yeah.
An introvert may be perfectly capable of walking into that situation and handling it in a very gregarious social way, but then they got to go home and rest and recoup from it.
It wears people out.
It wears them out. So I'm definitely more introverted on the social side, even though my communication style is very much an extroverted communication style.
And I'd agree with that because mine is too. But looking at the social interaction side, I would be your stereotypical introvert, and people can change, so you can evolve. So don't think you can't evolve, and don't think that you can't have subtypes. If you go to not this John, but John's personality test, it's John's personality test. I think johnspersonalitytest.com. It will actually give you, now it's a quick test. And it's fast. It's not really detailed or anything, and it's free, but it'll give you subtypes. And your subtypes could be INTJ, ISTJ, ENFJ, INFJ.
Right, and the long Truity test we took,
this did it too.
It really breaks it down to, and I like that it does that because you're not just this and that's it.
Yeah.
You have a range of things, and you lean in this direction more. Then you lean in that direction. And I like that better. Yeah. And that's one of the things the skeptics try to say about it, that if you try to use it as an exact science, well, of course, it's not going to be perfect because it's not meant to be an exact science. Yeah. But when you look at it as your the directions that you lean, your preferences for one or the other, then it makes a lot more sense.
Well, yeah, and getting back to the whole, neighborhood of personality types that you could be in, I still think that even that is fairly accurate. For instance, guardians would be your ESTJ, ISTJ, ESFJ, ISFJ. Now, I've never been a guardian, and I'm not really close to that. And a lot of people who know Myers-Briggs and know the functions, they can probably look at me, my videos, and the things that I've done and immediately say, yeah, Deasis is definitely not at all a guardian type. But I would classify, if I'm not mistaken, the neighborhood conglomerate, whatever, personality types that I tend to be in are INFP, ISTP, INTP, ESTP, ISFP, and stuff like that. So SP, NP. And then John over here would be STJ, NTJ, and maybe NFJ too. So,
let's talk about the last two, because we've covered the I versus the E. We've covered the
thinking, feeling.
Yeah, that's the next one, is thinking, feeling. Yeah. So what's the difference between, because some people think, I think I'm logical, but that's not what it's talking about. So what's the difference?
Yeah, no, it isn't. Both people can use both, but a thinker is inclined to make decisions based on rationalization and logic. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have feelings or even deep and intense feelings towards something, but it means at the end of the day, they're going to make their decision based on, I guess you can say, being pragmatic or logical.
It's a preference.
Right. Or even strategic.
The logical. Right.
Yeah, it's a preference. They're going to make their decision. They're not, in other words, they're not going to let themselves be ruled by the emotions that they may or may not feel. A feeler, they're going to be inclined to do what feels right a lot of the time. They're going to seek out group consensus, or they're going to be focused on their own ideals. If they're an introverted feeler, they're going to be focused on their own ideals and what feels right to them. It's going to be a value-based judgment, not a, logical or, well, this is the most practical way to do it. No, they're going to be like, well, this is the way that I feel fulfilled, and this is what makes me personally happy, even if it isn't the most practical way of doing it. That's just not going to be where their priorities are.
Yeah, so someone who's a feeler may say you need to follow your heart, but that doesn't mean they can't do their taxes. Yeah. Because doesn't mean they can't think logically and rationally.
No,
it just means that their decision-making preference is for feeling. And that's important to understand the difference. You're not being squarely pigeonholed as one thing or the other. It's that you have a preference. And how strong that preference is varies by degrees, which is why I would recommend, if you're going to take the test, take the full-on test like at Truity. Pay the $30, get the 40-page report.
It wasn't totally on.
It was totally on. See the details, because without the details, you fall in too much of a pigeonhole.
Yeah.
with just the 16 types. So you need to understand the more nuanced part of your personality. Now, for me, I barely crossed the line into extrovert when I took the test this time, just barely. And that's why it tagged me as an E. But if I didn't know that, I might think, oh, what's totally wrong? Because I'm not extroverted.
You're right.
But you have to understand the ways in which
the
it
terminology is
tagged
used, yeah.
me as extroverted, which is true. My communication style is very much that way.
That's
So you
true.
need to know the details or it's not going to make a lot of sense to you.
My favorite free one is the humanetrics.com one. To me, if you're going to do a free one, to me, in my personal opinion and experience, the most accurate one, if you answer as objectively as possible, this is the hard part about it, answering as you are and not what you want to be. Now, granted, you can aspire to be a certain personality type, and maybe one day you might be able to even move in that direction because we can change and fluctuate as humans. You could go from being an INTJ to an ENFP, or I knew a guy who was an ENFP for years, and as I got to know him and as he changed, he did change into an INTJ. But humanetrics.com is my favorite free one. I've seen it to be the most accurate personally in my own experience.
I have to say, I'm glad you brought that up about being honest on your test.
It's a hard thing to do.
It is
We
tough.
want to
and
see ourselves a certain way, but sometimes
I really
We're not.
feel like that's why this time, when I took the test today, I came out as an ENFJ.
Yeah.
Whereas all the other times I've taken the test, I come out as an INTJ, which it shows in my results. I do have those attributes very strongly, but not quite as strong as ENFJ. And here's the thing. I want to be an INTJ. That's how I want to be perceived. But when I sat down and I told myself, okay, this time I'm just going to be perfectly
I want to
honest.
be an STP
I'm gonna
because they're
answer
badasses.
I'm going to answer the questions based on how I actually behave rather than the way I think I should behave. And when I did that, it came out as ENFJ. And this really nailed it for me, why I think that's probably the more accurate category for me, is because the word it describes for ENFJs is the teacher.
Yeah.
I have always
You're definitely into that.
always labeled myself as a teacher my entire life. I've always loved to teach. I love to speak. I love to help people understand things. I've always been that. And I did not know that ENFJ was the teacher because I don't know Myers-Briggs like you do. I was vaguely familiar with it. I'd
God,
taken
I
the
love that
test.
stuff.
But you really
I
dig
love it,
into
man.
it. So when it showed that the label for that one is the teacher, I'm like, that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
So what's the benefit of this?
The benefit of it is getting to know how you function, why you have certain tolerances and abilities and talents that you have, and why you may not or may struggle in certain areas. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you are invaluable as a person. It doesn't mean that this person's invaluable. It doesn't mean that he or she necessarily did something wrong. It means that they function differently than you do. And so when you learn these things and when you learn to type people, the good aspect of it is that it helps you to work with people a little bit better. For instance, if you're talking to an ISTJ or an ESTJ, and you have to try to work out a problem with them, it might be good to discuss why you think it works. Because that's what they're going to be mainly focused on. They're not going to they might not really care why you like it or why it's important to you. They might want to know, okay, how does it work? Is it established? Is it accepted? Has it been tried, tested, proven, and true? So those are some of the good things about it. You can have a good aspect on understanding your children better.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's-
That if you know their type, personality type,
Yeah.
you know how to reason and deal with them better.
My kid doesn't have a ADHD. She's an ENFP.
Right.
She likes to dance and play around, doodle and draw all day.
I'm glad
See?
you brought that because Beth got her tutoring certification, and she had to go through some classes and things to do that. And that's one of the things. The examples they gave was of a teacher who had a student that was it just was very difficult to get this kid to pay attention,
Right.
the problem child in
Right.
the class, whatever, until one day they had a project where everyone was supposed to draw something. I forget exactly the details. And when that little girl sat down and did that, she was intensely focused the entire time, which is something the teacher had never seen.
Right.
So the way she learned and what she needed was just different from the pedagogy of your normal classroom environment.
And honestly, and this is something that a lot of people in society don't understand, and this is one reason why Myers-Briggs, to me, and studying the functions is very important, because the educational system, especially the elementary and maybe even the middle school educational system in America, is primarily set up for SJs. Now, SJs would be your ESTJ, ESFJ, FJ, ISTJ. Their style of learning, these are your guardian types. So these are your types that value tradition. They value written information, things that are established, whether they're true or not, but established.
Data, facts.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's going to be their learning style. So any other style that is out of that realm, you might be quick to mistype as having a mental disorder. Maybe that you'll think they're ADD or ADHD, or maybe they have bipolar or depression, when in reality their learning style, because of the way that their brain functions, because that's what MBTI is about, is just different than your SJs, which are your most common personality type.
That's one of the things I saw when researching this, that Albert Einstein, when he was in school, they thought he was slow.
Right. He's classified as an INTP, or some people also classify him as an ENTP, but nevertheless he's classified as an ENTP.
Yeah, he's not an SJ.
No,
Right.
no.
And so they thought, he's slow because he didn't work within that same environment. But then you put the guy in the environment where he does work well, and look what he accomplishes.
Absolutely. If you look at NTPs in the educational system, a lot of times they're going to look apathetic. They're going to appear disinterested. They're not really going to be concentrating on a lot of the concrete written step-by-step type of stuff, because they're intuitives who use extroverted intuition, which is a very creative, abstract, inventive type of brain function. And so people that see people like that don't put them in their natural environment are going to be very quick to mistype them as ADD or ADHD. But man, I'm telling you, put them in a field of creativity, science, or other stuff like that, and watch them go. It's fascinating.
And I would say a strong argument for Myers-Briggs, detractors, understood, is that most of the Fortune 500 companies in the world use Myers-Briggs. Now, the test says you should not ever use it to determine whether or not someone should get a job. Like if they apply for a job, you shouldn't give them the test and not give them the job because they're not the right type for it. Like that would be unethical.
Right.
But you should use it to help the dynamics inside the company, how to deal with individuals, how they deal with each other, how to motivate people, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, and some of the generalization is valid. To be fair, on the other side of that, I mean, ISTPs tend to be very good with mechanics. They tend to be good at working on stuff. In fact, it seems like a lot of mechanics that I see and know are either ISTP or ISTJs, because they're very good at working with their hands, being hands-on, being left alone to work in an environment. So I think it is a good way, and I understand the whole, you don't want to rule people out. But I think it is good because you can use it to figure out how people are good at certain jobs. ENFJs, INFJs, they're going to make very good counselors.
Yeah.
INFPs are going to be very creative and innovative, maybe even revolutionary.
I would say that if it had a strong function, it would be, rather than using it to filter who gets the job, what you should do is use it to make them the best possible person in that job that they could be by understanding the motivations, the rewards, and how they interact with other people.
Right.
So if they show they have the qualifications for the job and they get hired, okay, now how can we make the most out of this guy or this lady because they are this particular personality type?
Very true.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
However, the skeptics have a lot of negative things to say about it. Particularly in the field of psychology, it's looked at as pseudoscience.
Yeah, psychologists think it's a joke.
Yeah, they really do.
In general, they think it's a joke.
I couldn't find any serious psychologist anywhere who had anything good to say about Myers-Briggs.
If I'm not mistaken, the farthest they will validate Myers-Briggs or MBTI typology is Carl Jung's functions. They'll say, okay, well, Carl Jung's functions did have some validity, but that's about as far as it goes.
And they say that like the functions weren't based on study. They were kind of based on his like personal feelings, hypothesis.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't heavily based on study and research, and so it doesn't really have much of a standing to begin with. And then Myers-Briggs took it even farther, which brought it even further outside the realm of empirical evidence.
Yeah, that's true.
And they say that it doesn't account for, anxiety and dysfunction. It didn't account for that. And so that makes it severely lacking, where the one that psychology, even though it's not 100%, does put more stock in is the big 5 personality traits.
Right.
And they say because it does take into account these things that Myers-Briggs does not. And the 2 ladies who started Myers-Briggs were not psychologists.
Yeah.
They did not have background. They did not have an education in it. So it's started off on a kind of weak platform according to psychology.
To be fair to the skeptics, and I am a believer of Myers-Briggs, but to be fair to the skeptics, it would probably be along the same lines as astrology.
Yeah, that's what they compare
Highly
it to,
debatable,
astrology.
and some people just think the whole thing is a joke.
Yeah.
Me, I've used it. I personally find it very useful, especially knowing how to talk to people and even knowing, say what my daughter's strengths are, weaknesses, where she needs to work on stuff. I think it's a great way to categorize people and their behavior. So
now the Myers-Briggs Institute says that people taking the test more than once, 90% of the time get the same result.
Yeah.
But psychologists say that there is a 50% chance of you getting a different result after 6 weeks, and there's a 75% chance of you getting a different result after 9 months. Now, my personal experience was different because I've been taking this test since I was 14 years old. No, earlier than that, actually, 13 years old.
Wow.
And I got the same result decade after decade after decade until today.
That did surprise me.
But I
don't know, man.
Here's the thing about
the description was on point. If we're describing extroversion from the point of communication style, then yes, fine.
Yes.
Okay. If we're talking about social preference,
no.
Hell no.
No. Yeah, definitely
no way.
not. But I really feel like that can be explained. The fact that someone retakes the test and it's different, I think that can be explained by people who are taking the test, but they're not honestly answering the questions based on their behavior. They're answering the questions based on how they feel like they want to be at that moment.
Right.
That makes more sense. But whereas for me, when I finally just sat down and took the test for exactly the way I know I act, then what I got back, while not completely disconnected from what I always got before, very similar.
It was. It wasn't so far off that it was laughable.
Yeah, it was very close because I got 68% ENFJ, 60% INTJ, which is what I always got all the other times I took it. So it was very close.
That's what I've always maintained you are.
Yeah.
From the beginning, since I first met you, I said INTJ.
Definitely not far off. So, yeah, I can see why that could be responsible for people retaking the test and it being different.
Right.
Because they're not being honest when they take the test.
Well, no, and I think some of that is the test fault. because sometimes the test can have very generic and abstract questions, especially the free ones. Now, the reason for that is very likely due to the fact that intuitives are usually the ones who are into sociology who create the test, so they're going to ask less direct, more abstract questions that sensors are going to have a very hard time grasping because they're going to want concrete. For instance, you could ask in one of the free tests, do I stand out or wish to be in a large crowd? Now, an intuitive would generalize that and look at the big picture and say, well, yes or no. A sensor might say, well, that depends on the crowd and what am I doing? They're going to want exacts, they're going to want details, and they're going to see it as applying to a certain situation. So when you ask them a general question, well, what do you think about this? They're going to be like, well, what's the point in thinking about the what if, or what situation are we referring to in particular?
Right.
They're going to want concrete details.
And that's one of the weaknesses that skeptics would say about it. And I'm not going to lie to you. All the other tests I took did fail in this way, that the questions were very either or, yes or no, right or wrong. And they say that is not the way to get insight into people. But the test we took today at Truity was not that way.
This was more of a middle ground.
You graded yourself on a scale. And it was based on the scale. And Myers-Briggs, the Institute, says that the test is getting better and better and better. And that's why it remains as popular as it is. Millions of people have taken this test. Almost all the Fortune 500 companies use it. So I just can't imagine people spending all this money on this stuff. Well, I mean, I guess it's possible. But it seems unlikely that big business would spend money on something that just absolutely doesn't work at all, like astrology.
Right. So I want to talk about this for a second. So I got INFP. Now, this is the paid test that me and John both took.
ENFJ.
Now, I will say this. The free test, humanetrics.com, has consistently given me this too. And Matt, who we're going to be showing in the interview, he said I was an ESTP.
Oh, that's right.
Now, I want to talk about that for a minute, too, because I'm going to tell you why I don't feel Matt is actually very far off. First off, when I take similar MBTI test, STP does come into my subtypes. So that's not off, but also unhealthy INFPs can look very much like ESTPs, because in typology, especially Myers-Briggs, you have healthy, what's called healthy and unhealthy types. You have healthy INFJs, you have unhealthy INFJs. For instance, healthy INFPs will be very warm, very artistic, very dreamy, very imaginative, very helpful. Now, unhealthy ones, or you could say dark-sided ones, which, I mean, that could be someone, it could be a personality type or an INFP who's been through a lot, or, ENFJ who's been through a lot, unhealthy. But an unhealthy INFP can be very brash, very aggressive, combative, very challenging towards the status quo. And they could look like an ESTP. So
that makes sense. Yeah. And we looked that up, that under high stress conditions, the way you'll behave might be very counterintuitive to your type.
Yeah.
So that made sense to me.
Right. And since I'm an INFP, I'm very idealistic and revolution oriented. So that could bring out the fire side in me, which would look like an ESTP, very much like an ESTP, because I've seen angry INFPs before, or ones that stand for something or feel a certain devotion to a certain cause or, an injustice, and they can look like STPs. They can, or ESFPs or ESTPs, just that whole fiery, buck the system, fight the power, reckless type of persona.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, let's go through, because I really want the people who are watching to see the level of detail that these tests go into. So let's walk through my report and see what it said about me. So it calls me an ENFJ, And it breaks down all the elements of the personality. Introversion versus extroversion is the first. And it says that this dimension describes how you manage your energy. Like your preference for introversion or extroversion relates to how readily you express yourself, how easily you warm up to new people, and the extent to which you engage with the world around you. But most fundamentally, this dimension relates to whether you are energized by time alone or time with people. And so, for me, I'm barely extroverted, just 55%. And I understand why that can happen, because I don't seek social environments. I don't. Like, if I get invited to something, I'll go, but I don't seek it out. I'm like, oh, I got to find something to go do this weekend. But once I'm there, I tend to be a dominant figure in the room. Like, I have an opinion. I want to talk about it. I have no problems discussing things. I have a very extroverted communication style, and I feel like this captured that really well.
I would agree with that part.
Yeah. The only thing that it got wrong, in my opinion, and my self-awareness, is that it said that I seek those social situations, which I don't. But my behavior while in those social situations, it was spot on.
Right.
And we've talked about that before. That's one failing of this particular kind of test, is that it does not differentiate extroversion as a communication style versus extroversion as a social style. And so it can get that wrong. So that was that one. Then there's sensing versus intuition. And it says this dimension describes how you process information, like we talked about. Your preference for sensing or intuition indicates whether your style of thinking is straightforward, factual, and concrete, or creative, interpretive, and abstract. Sensors and intuitives tend to be interested in different kinds of information, with sensors more interested in facts and details, and intuitives more interested in ideas. And for me, I'm also close to the middle.
You're kind of both.
I'm close to the middle.
I think you're kind of both.
It hit me as 43% sensing, 57% intuition. So I'm pretty close to the middle there. And that's one of the things skeptics have a problem with. They say that because everybody falls so close to the middle, it's on a bell curve, and it's just not an accurate way to tag people because there's too many people in the middle.
That is what the skeptics say.
Yeah, there's
they
only
think
15%.
Most people are around the middle. Why are we giving them black or whites and putting them over here when most people follow a general consensus of being here, about here?
And that's why I like this test, because it actually gives you the percentages on either side rather than just telling you, oh, well, you're an ENFJ.
Right.
You are to these degrees, and the descriptions of each trait are different based on how far to one side or the other you go. So this is so far the best test that I've taken that does Myers-Briggs. I really like it. It's all right. You just don't like what it said about you, even though it's true.
It was wrong, John.
So
it was wrong.
I appreciate that, but the skeptics say that the problem with it is because only 15% of people fall outside the center, that it's really kind of pointless to try to label people one way or the other.
Right.
But again, that's why I like
Would you call it shoebox them? Would you say?
Pigeonholing.
Pigeonholing.
It pigeonholes people. Now, yes, go ahead.
Judging, perceiving. We didn't cover that one.
Yeah, we're not there yet. First, thinking versus feeling, but we'll cover judging and perceiving. That's the last one. Thinking versus feeling. This dimension describes your orientation to personal values. Your preference for thinking or feeling can be thought of as your preference for head versus heart in your decision making. This dimension relates to how you prioritize conflicting values and whether you tend to feel more comfortable relying on logic and reason or emotions and personal judgments. Now, here's where Matt, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it, Matt. I didn't like it. But Matt actually got me right, because he said that I'm more driven by my moral value, right?
Yeah, your values.
And he's right about that. I'm not as much of a pragmatist as I would like to think that I am. I have limits. I don't want to do things that harm, even if it's the best way to get things done.
This is where I'm kind of conflicted with you being a feeler because, yes, your decisions are very value driven, but you approach them, in my opinion, in a very strategic and logical way.
Well, it puts me dead in the middle. 49% thinking, 51% feeling.
Wow.
So I definitely don't lean heavily in one direction or the other.
That I agree with.
Yeah.
You use both very well. Yeah. I've just always thought of you more as a thinker.
Which makes sense. If I'm dead in the middle, you could. And plus, in what circumstances and situations do you see me the most? Our work.
That's true.
Right?
Okay.
And in
That's
my
true.
work, I am very much the thinker.
You are.
I employ that side of me.
That's a good point.
Have a whole lot of opportunity to see my moral judgments at play because we don't really, outside of work and our discussions about philosophy, which have no connection to that or whatever.
That's true.
You know, so it's different. It's a different thing. Okay, and the last one is the judger versus the perceiver. And this dimension of personality describes how you manage your life. Your preference for perceiving versus judging has to do with your orientation towards structure, schedules, deadlines, and organization. It also has to do with how you tend to manage your time and approach the work you have to do. Now, Diasis was shocked at the percentage of perception I have, even though I am a judger. By and large, 65%. I'm 35% on the perceiving side, and I had to point out to him, look around. You guys can't see it, but I have like some papers laying out. I've got an envelope on the shredder that I could have just easily dropped into the shredder. And someone
that is total perceiver.
who is way on the judging side, that would drive them crazy.
It would.
But
they are the ones who you call OCD, or they are the ones always joking, saying, I'm OCD about this. Usually when somebody says I'm OCD about this, it means they're a judger.
Yep.
Now, again, the terminology, it doesn't mean judgmental.
Yeah, and that's
Judging in Myers-Briggs refers to structure or structural preference.
Yeah.
The way they accomplish things and get things done. Usually if you are strategic and concrete and have an ABC 1, 2, 3 approach to something and you like things and there's certain spots and you're rigid about deadlines, you're probably a judger. I'm a total perceiver. I just wing it.
Yeah.
I just go for it.
But you're not 100%.
No, I'm not.
And you would know this if you ever watched the Aces fold his clothes.
Oh.
Because he's very careful about the way he does that.
I can't be.
But with other things, you just don't care. You're, fly by the seat of your pants kind of guy. So nobody's 100% one way or the other. Yeah, much more spontaneous.
Yeah.
So I appreciated the way
we'll get there
when
we get there. We'll figure it out when we get there. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. That's all the type of things that perceivers do.
Yeah.
Judges are like, no, let's figure it out before we get there.
I mean, if nothing else, taking these tests teaches you a lot about yourself.
Yeah, it does.
And especially a detailed report
And
like
others.
this, really reading all the details and looking at the percentages and how it applies to you. For me, it's really good for your self-awareness to help you to understand, why do I behave like this? Why do I do things this way? Well, because it's part of who you are.
Yeah, it can help you to understand why certain things depress you or why certain people piss you off. And then you can also learn how to deal with those certain people that piss you off, because maybe their function order is a little bit different, and you can find ways to communicate or work with them or around them if you have to.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And let's say, like, you have a sibling who is the ambitious, successful, amazing person. You're like, man, why can't I be like them? Because you're not them.
Yeah.
And you need to look at what your strengths are and stop trying to imitate someone whose personality type is not you. You're never going to do what they do because you're not who they are. And these kinds of tests and classifications help people realize, oh, I'm not my amazingly successful governor brother.
Right.
I'm the artist. I'm the designer. I'm the creative person. I need to focus on that. And then, hey, I might be wildly successful too in a different environment.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. And Yeah, I want to talk about my personal experience for why I got an MBTI. I never fit in. I've always been an outsider. And I never felt like I was good at a lot of the practical day-to-day stuff that a lot of people around me were good at it. And I never really felt like I fit in. So when I took the test and I would consistently, and I've gotten other stuff like ISTP, STP, SFP, but I generally get INFP. INFPs are misunderstood because they're very deep and creative. They speak very figuratively about a lot of things. And so they can be very misunderstood. In fact, they're the most misunderstood type that there is. And a lot of their functions and talents are not really the type of everyday talents that would be useful in society unless you were somewhere within the arts district, music, maybe even being a therapist, counselor, artist, designer, etc. And so it helped me to see where I fit in, and it helped me to see my weak points, but it also helped me to see my strong points, because then I thought, okay, like you said, I'm not like them because I'm not them. They are good at this, but that's okay, because I'm good at this. I'm good at being creative. I'm good at being idealistic and revolutionary.
Yeah, that was his number
That's what I'm good
one
at.
trait was idealism.
Idealism,
By
yeah.
far, idealism. Whereas for me, my number one trait is dominant. Dominant and assertive and clever. I like that one, clever.
And the thing is, let's say you are an ENFJ. Dominant would definitely apply to that in the realm of leadership with regards to people, because ENFJs are not your bosses, ENFJs are your leaders. For instance, two people that I can think of off the bat that I think are ENFJs, and like I said, this is all very debatable, but my personal opinion and observations, and a lot of people think this too, I think that Dr. Phil and Oprah are ENFJs. To me, they are healthy examples, or good examples of healthy ENFJs.
Dr. Phil is an amazing teacher. I listen to his podcast, Fill in the Blanks, regularly, and he is a really good teacher. Yeah, I like that guy. Plus, he's from Texas, and so am I, so I can kind of relate.
Is he from Texas?
Yeah, he's from Texas.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you think that drawl comes from?
The drawl, yeah. I think that you are disgusting. I think you need to change everything about everything that you do.
One of my favorite lines of his is, if what you're doing isn't working, do something else. I appreciate his homespun wisdom. He's good at that.
He throws out those little country analogies every now and then too that are funny as hell.
Yeah. Now back to what you were talking about yourself versus other people. An interesting product or byproduct, whatever aspect of my personality type, according to this, is that I see the potential in people. And so whereas like on social media and stuff, when you get yourself into the fights you like to have,
hell yeah,
you read all this blowback and feedback. But then I'm like, no.
I'm like, yeah.
Like I see the potential in you and your personality, which is why I wanted you on the show. So it's funny how things that I didn't even stop and think about myself, when you read it in the results of a detailed report from a test like this, you're like, oh, yeah, I do that. That
plus,
makes
I got
sense.
Plus, I got a lot of STP in here, which would definitely make me love to be offensive. And I do love being offensive, John. It is too much fun to not do. I'm sorry.
Your drive for conflict kind of cracks me up because that's
awesome.
not me at all. That's not.
It's so
part
much
of me.
fun.
My idealism is way down. I'm at 43, and you're like 68 or 69. You're way up there.
Something like that.
Yeah.
My biggest thing was idealism, creativity, type stuff.
But it really can.
Something like that.
It can teach you a whole lot about yourself. So, skeptics aside, and I do understand their arguments. I do. I understand why they think that it's, bogus or baloney or whatever. But I will say that for me personally, just seeing my own attributes broken down and recognizing them in myself, it does a lot of good for me. It's done a lot of good for me through the years to know that about myself. And knowing you, even if it's just generally speaking, And knowing how you work, what makes you tick, even just generally speaking, helps me to know how we need to deal with each other on
It's
a
true.
professional level when we do the work that we do together.
It's true.
And on a personal level in our friendship, which is funny. I didn't know until you told me that our types are very much compatible.
Yeah. We're
as
yin and
friends.
yang.
Who knew?
Yeah. It works. It just works.
It just works. Yeah. So for this one, I'm definitely more of a believer than I have been for any of the other things that we've covered and discussed. Though I have off days where I'm like, this is all bullshit. And then I have other days I'm like, no, this is definitely me.
I would say I'm a 60-40. I mean, I see the flaws in it, and it is true, depending on how you evaluate it. For instance, Matt's type of evaluation was different because it's coming more from the study of the functions itself versus the actual Myers-Briggs typology. And again, it's not way off because the way that he describes me being an ESTP is not completely off either when you equate it how he's equating it. For instance, extroversion based on communication style. Well, that would take me right out of introversion to extroversion. But if we're talking about social preference, which is what this one seemed to focus a little bit more on, maybe. Well, no, I'd say it was pretty much on communication style too. But either way, I'm still more of an introvert.
Now, Matt had some really interesting insights.
He did.
On types as it applies to the very fundamentalist conservative religions that all three of us, Matt included, were raised in.
Yeah.
So let's play his interview. And he didn't just talk about that, but he had some really good insights on it. So let's play that real quick and then we'll talk about it.
Okay, so we want to welcome Matthew Cowan onto the show. He actually has a YouTube channel dedicated to Myers-Briggs and other in-depth psychology. And he's going to be talking to us a little bit about the functions and why he believes in it and why he doesn't. So, Matt, if you want to go ahead and start out and tell us a little bit about it and give us an introduction. What got you into this?
At first, it was just a simple Facebook test. And I was one of the rare cases where I actually was typed correctly by the test online. It's not very common, but most people get typed properly with online tests. And so I got ENTP, and it made a lot of sense to me. And I just kind of flirted around with it on different YouTube channels and things like that. It wasn't really until I was, going through my divorce and things like that, where I was just kind of getting more into psychology and different things like that. And it was just dealing with structured of losing my religion, essentially, really got me more involved in that.
All right. So what is your general impression of MBTI, aka Myers-Briggs? And what do you think some of its strengths are?
Okay. Well, the strengths is better understanding other people. And when you think of life itself, manipulation is everything, whether that be positive manipulation or negative manipulation. And so whether you want to encourage somebody or you want to get something out of somebody, knowing how they function and how they're wired is very crucial. And so one benefit of it is, while you were going through your issues with the Facebook group, for instance, a lot of people were throwing a lot of vitriol at you and, saying a lot of negative things. And to me, I was just like, he's just acting like an ESTP. To me, I didn't think anything less of it, and then there's people that have their issues with Lloyd Evans. I was like, he's just an ESTJ. He's just acting like himself. Don't judge him for being himself. Now you can judge people when they should be doing a better job because of who they are. And for myself personally, I've used this in my dating life. I can type people based off dating profiles. I'm currently with an ENTJ right now, which is my silver pair. And things go a lot better that way when you understand him and myself as well. I've been, people have asked my counsel on divorces, and like I had an ENFJ friend that was divorcing his ISFJ wife, and I knew more about her than he did. And I was like, you can't say this to her. You can't do this to her. This is going to piss her off. This is not going to piss her off. And now he's healthily divorced, and and things worked out much better. And so just different things like that.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, because there's a couple things I want to talk about, regarding your typing of me and John. I think that, while me and John think that you got us, it wasn't perfectly accurate and it's not a perfect science. I feel like you generally did hit the nail on the head in describing our general behavior and characteristics. Like when you talked about how me and John work together, and how we function and how, or why a lot of behavior that we have is the way that it is, it made sense. And then when you described Lloyd Evans, and like I said, for everybody watching, this is on Matt's channel. His page is ENTPXJW, and we'll have the link for that in the description. I feel like it was mostly on point. All right, so Matt, I want to talk about a particular aspect of how conservative religions can really inhibit who we are psychologically. You think you could elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, we mentioned, just a different fundamentalist religions, things like that. People like to call them cults, or but this varies in Eastern, Middle East, different religions in the South, and they always have a descriptive of what an ideal woman or an ideal man is. And in most cases, especially with Christian religions, they bring up Proverbs with the capable wife, and they essentially describe an ISFJ woman who's going to be super dutiful, super caring,
Right.
worried about what everyone else wants and just really about everyone else, not about herself. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you shouldn't discriminate against ISFJs for being ISFJs, but when you have examples like my sister is an ENTJ, which is an alpha, it's very rare for women to be ENTJs, but she's the head of a government, a CEO type person, and she's in a religion that essentially denigrates her and tears her down for not being an ISFJ, essentially, asking a cat to bark, essentially, and if you see like men, if they want to compare you to Christ to say, hey, follow the Christ, put on the torture stake or cross and follow him. Christ is an INFJ. And so INFJs are affiliative types. They're all about community, but most men are SPs and they're pragmatic. They're not part of the team, and so they're not used to being told to toe the line into an authoritative nature of this is the way a man should be and everyone should act this way. And so it could be very, depressing to men. You see this in many of these religions where they just give up. They don't even try anymore because they feel like such bad sinners. And just because they just can't live up to those, the shoes of an INFJ,
All right. So, yeah, thank you for that, Matt. So now let's talk about the problems. What do you think are some of the problems with the MBTI system?
Well, if we're talking about the test itself, I don't follow the letter dichotomy because it does not make sense to people because they're like perceiving, judging, thinking, and feeling. They're like, well, I don't want to be known as a feeler because I might be too emotional. That makes people think of less of me. And I want to be known as logical. And so I don't want to be there. And so you have a lot of people that have preconceived ideas just because they don't understand the language, and so when you think of like cognitive functions and different things like that, you have people that take the tests based on what they want to be or what they think they are, or they read the descriptions and they say, oh, that sounds cool, let's do that, or the letter dichotomy, you have, here's a really huge misconception I get all the time with INFJs that are actually INFPs, because you look at cognitive functions and FI is a judgment function, and INFPs have that in their hero slot. So they're always judging. They're always making decisions based on right and wrong, but they're perceiving,
Right.
type. And then you have INFJs, and their highest function is the NI hero, which is a perceiving function, but they're considered judges, and so they get flip flop. And introverts are the worst because they're the ones that get mixed up the most and most mistyping as our introverts as well. So the language is an issue, just people a general ignorance of what it's about. You have obviously, conflicting ideas in the psychology fields, who don't like it, and they're like, well, debunk because this is not true. Well, yeah, psychology is a soft science. This isn't geology. We're not measuring dirt. Everything here is an abstract thought. We're taking to deal with metaphysics in this situation, and so I think a bad part of it is people mix up nature with nurture. And so things get all mixed up involved in there. But for the most part, I think it's better. I think imagine a world where we were able to go to school that was made for our type and set up that way. Because most schooling, for instance, favors people like John or Lloyd, because STJs and NFP Quadra is all about absorbing information from books and remembering it. It's all about rote memory, and so they definitely have a huge advantage in that situation, while other types don't learn that way. They're learn more hands-on, for instance, or they're just more physical and not necessarily, they like to have verbal learning or being taught in a different form. And so imagine how nice the world would be, not some religious utopia, but maybe a psychological utopia where everyone understands each other. And we live in a world where you can just like, well, that's how they're going to act, And so if we all accept each other for who we are, based on a general understanding, I think the world will be much better.
Matt, that was beautifully stated, and thank you for that. Thank you for that really good commentary. That is one thing that I've noticed about our school system is it does seem to be set up in favor of SJs. And so a lot of your other personality types who have different learning styles, like what you were saying, they fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
So, because I think about SPs and they learn very much through practical application, or you think about NTPs or NFPs, and it seems like they learn through challenging ideas, maybe even debating, bouncing things off the wall, and other creative processes like that.
Yeah. If use my personal, experience in school. School was very easy to me, but I usually finished my schoolwork real quickly, and I had to be put outside because I'd be bothering the other students. And so, to me, as an NT, I don't understand affiliative nature barely at all, especially at a young age. And so I assume everyone just does what they want, and I don't really comprehend different right and wrongs of what's best for the community. And so a lot of my upbringing, is, I was mad at myself because I just didn't quite understand things because everyone seemed to be so this way and I was this way. And a lot of things just don't make sense, and they still don't make sense. But now that I have this knowledge, I can understand a lot better. I can understand my issues with my past of being in a fundamentalist religion and understanding the persecution I went through, why they did it. And I also hate them less, if that makes sense. And so, when you get to even my little, my modest level of understanding this, you lose the ability to be upset with people.
All right. Yeah, Matt, thank you so much for all of that. And we want to thank you for being on the show. I really like that guy. Good observations.
Yeah. Matt really seems to know his stuff. And if you guys want to see someone really break it down, go check out, what's his channel name again?
ENTP XJW.
Okay, yeah. And is it healthy something or other?
Something like that.
Healthy. We'll put a link in the video description because, man, he really digs into like the details and all of the what it all means and how it applies. And like for me, I would say he was probably 70% right.
Yeah.
And I'd never even met the guy. He just saw my videos on my other channel, and that was it. Based on that, he was pretty spot on about a number of things I don't even like to admit. So I got to give him
likewise.
I got to give him snaps.
Thanks, Matt, for exposing us to the world.
But I have not been in, like I said earlier, into all this like you and he are. So when he started talking about like Jesus. Right. And what Jesus' type probably was, and what the typical female that's looked up to by the Christian conservatives, what her type is, and how that makes people who don't fall under those type feel somehow unworthy.
Right.
I could totally relate to that from our background, because people who didn't fit those types, they definitely were looked down on as somehow less than other people.
Well, and that is an interesting thing about society, because even Myers-Briggs seems to shed light on that. You have your stereotypically male and female types. Now, stereotypically, INFP is considered a female type because of their emotionally supportive nature and stuff like that. You talk about Jesus, and I think that one reason why a lot of men may have a hard time relating to Jesus is because he is stereotypically classified as an INFJ. A lot of people type Jesus as either INFJ, ENFJ, and sometimes INFP. Now, these are not your typical men's men, which would be your ESTJs or ISTJs and your ESTPs and ISTPs, which are your men's men. Hands-on, handle stuff, assertive,
Aggressive, yeah,
tough.
Yeah.
So Jesus is actually, if I'm not mistaken, INFJs are typically seen as a female or a unisex or female type.
Right.
So I think that a lot of men
Caring,
are probably,
compassionate, looking after other people, which is very much how he's described.
And nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
If you're a man, but those are stereotypically, those are not classified as your manly men.
It would make sense, though, that because it's a minority,
Right.
Among men,
Right.
it's a minority type. It's not the bulk.
No.
That if men are trying to live up to a standard
Right.
of a person who has a personality type that's so far removed from their own,
Right.
that could be very difficult.
It can
That
be.
could be a struggle for a lot of people.
Well, and let's look at the female side of it. In the Bible, it seems like most females, if you're into Myers-Briggs, would fall under your NFJ or SFJ. Like you look at Solomon and the obedient wife and the hard-working at home.
Right. I remember that, Proverbs 31. I remember from our
Right.
churching days. I remember that, yeah.
Right, and for all you out here who know Myers-Briggs, you know that I'm talking about most likely an ISFJ. That's going to be their natural environment. A lot of your ISFJs, which most ISFJs that I've seen are women, so it's a typically female type, at least right now in the society from my own personal experience, are your homemakers. ESFJs and ISFJs are homemaking type of women and people in general. They're very, very big on traditional family values. They're very big on taking care of things around the house in a very concrete type of way. And that is the one main archetype that the Bible suggests and
Right.
heavily applies you should be. Now, if you're an ENTJ or ESTP woman, they're like, to hell with that shit. No.
Right. And
Because that's not them.
Matt mentions
At
his
all.
sister, who's an alpha.
Yeah.
And isn't anything like that. And so back in their days
Yeah.
of being involved in all that, she
Oh, no,
didn't
they would've
fit in
stoned her
at
to
all.
death.
Which, yeah, it wouldn't work.
Oh, no, it wouldn't have worked. If she's an ENTJ female, which is what I think Matt said she was, they are your executives. These are your executive boss, structure, go-getter type of females. One that I could think of that I think is an ENTJ in popular culture is Captain Janeway from Star Trek Voyager.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I
Very-
love Voyager. That was a good one.
Oh, yeah. I love Voyager. I've seen every episode. But she would most people would classify her as a ENTJ, ESTJ, maybe ENFJ. And these are very dominant types in society.
Makes sense. She's the captain.
She's
she
the captain.
commands the ship.
We
Right.
can do this the right way, the wrong way, or the Janeway.
That's good.
Yeah, I like it. I read that somewhere as a meme.
That's good. That's good.
But yeah.
I can see that. And there's others. Another one you brought up before, Judge Judy.
Judge Judy,
Right?
yeah.
Another one.
Judge Judy would strike me as your quintessential stereotypical ESTJ. I mean, just look at the way that she handles things and is structured very down to business facts and details. She's quick-witted and fast with it, too. And if you ever deal with an angry, pissed off ESTJ. That's pretty much how they'll do you. They'll whip you into shape. I mean, that's why a lot of your military people are STJs.
Oh, yeah, because we were reading that earlier, the uniformed.
Yeah.
Yeah, the uniformed individuals.
ESTJs are very big on taking charge and structure, and ISTJs are too, but more in the background, which is why they say that they make good soldiers.
Gotcha.
Right. And like I said, I mean, none of this is official documented stuff, but in popular Myers-Briggs, pseudoscience, whatever you want to call it, that would be the general consensus.
And that is something that, like, in the detailed report...
ISTPs make your best snipers, apparently.
In the detailed report that we took from Truity, it tells you the jobs that your type would typically do better in. And so that's interesting.
ISTJs
if you're in a
would be military.
job that you really don't like...
Yeah.
Maybe you take the test and see if maybe that's not a job that your personality type
Probably don't
fits
belong
in
there.
very well. Now, the skeptics say that in all the surveys that have been done about job satisfaction, that it doesn't really stack up. It doesn't stack up that these types do better in these jobs as far as job satisfaction goes. But it notably did not say whether or not they were good at it.
That's right.
But just not happy in it, and that could make a difference, in my opinion. You know,
Very true.
it doesn't matter. I mean, you could work for a lousy boss and be unhappy in your job, even if you're really good at your job.
Right.
So I don't know that job satisfaction would really dictate whether or not you're good at it.
Very true.
You know, so there's that.
Yeah. The job aspect is really interesting. You could have somebody at the job. If you're an SJ or an STP, you would think they're lazy if they don't want to work the front counter in retail, or if they tend to hide in the background and do background things, or if they tend to sit in the office all day. Now, chances are they're probably not as lazy as you think. They're probably an introverted intuitive, and they like to deal more with abstract ideals or things that are not concrete away from people, which would make a lot of STJs and STPs look at them as lazy, but maybe they're not. They're just not doing what they're naturally gifted at doing. So it's something to think about.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just like in that conservative Christian environment, there are expectations set up for people, men and women, in our society in general. In the American culture or whatever country you live in, there are certain expectations that not everybody fits. And knowing that you don't fit and why you don't fit can help you not look down on yourself just because you're not like the bulk or the majority of other people.
That's right. And it can help you get to where you need to be.
Yeah.
Because certain personality types are much rarer than others.
That's true, yeah. And it tells you when you take the test what the percentage is. And that's good to know, because if you're only 2% of the population, well, of course you're going to find that you don't fit in most other situations, and it can help you tremendously to find the area that you would fit in better and be there, which I would think that would lead to more happiness, job satisfaction, life satisfaction, if you could do that.
It definitely can when you can use Myers-Briggs in that way, yeah. To me, it's got a lot of practical use if you know how to use it and understand it well enough.
Yeah. Well, I definitely am more of a believer in this, like I said, than any of the other things that we've covered, because if nothing else, when I take it and read the details, that's me all over. Now, some would say that's the Barnum effect. And that's, what is it?
The sheep goat effect?
I'm seeing what I want to see.
That's it. Placebo.
Yeah, I like what I read, so I want to read it. But I have to push back on that because there's some things in there I don't like, but I know is true about me.
This, to me, has a little more practical use than some of the other stuff.
Like what Matt said. Matt said in his video about me that I want to make people comfortable. And at first I pushed back. I'm like, I don't care if people are comfortable. I don't care. But then we go downstairs because the studio's upstairs. And I make Diace's coffee, and I'm getting the stuff out of the fridge for him, and I realize, well, crap.
So nice, John.
I don't like being nice. I don't like feeling like I need to make people comfortable, but the truth is, I kind of do.
My dad is a quintessential ISTP. Man, do we clash. Because he's about as nuts and bolts as it gets. He is your stereotype, likes to be left the hell alone, works on machinery, doesn't like being bothered all day. You could ask him for something, walk into the kitchen. Yeah, hey, Dad, can I have some creamer for my coffee? He'll be like this. Yeah, get it your damn self. Top shelf.
Right.
Total ISTP.
Whereas
Total.
I'm like, here, let me get that for
Yeah.
you. And I don't even think about it. I'm
Likes
not actively
motorcycles.
thinking about doing it. I just do it.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. Well, what do you think? Do you think that Myers-Briggs is for real? Do you think it's pseudoscience? Do you think it's somewhere in between? Let us know in the comments. And if you have a story about anything that we've been talking about, anything that's out there, anything that's controversial, we would love to hear about it. So send it to the email address showing on the screen right now, and we would love to have you on the show. We're always looking for new people to interview and to discuss these things with. And I'm glad we've been able to find so many people so far, and I hope we can keep doing that.
Yeah, some really good interviews.
We did. And Matt was a great one. I'm glad he came on.
Yeah, he's cool.
So if you liked the video, be sure to click like. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification icon so when we release new videos, you will be notified. And as always, thanks for watching.
Perfect.